If you have spent any real amount of time reading or taking classes in or researching marketing, you've probably heard the phrase SWOT analysis. So SWOT, I believe it stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That process, that framework for sort of analyzing your business from a marketing standpoint is famous. And it's famous because it works. These are 4 areas that you really should pay attention to. But I have to tell you, the idea of sitting down and doing a corporate style SWOT analysis of my business has never been something that was particularly appealing to me, which is where today's guest comes in and makes this whole process a lot more entertaining. Casey Fatchett is the host of the Nerdy Photographer podcast. He is a longtime wedding photographer based in the New York metropolitan area. And he's just a super entertaining guy all the way around. He has been in business for a long time, and he has great insights that he shares openly on his podcast, but always seems to make them fun and kind of about those things that are classically nerdy. So today he is joining me to chat about how you can do a marketing analysis of your business through the lens of the superhero comic book world. So I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. Marketing is one of those things I always talk about. It's like laundry. It's an ongoing job. So it's great to be always thinking about it in different ways. And I feel like Casey's take on this is going to be as fun as it is valuable.
Welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. My name is Anami Tonkin, and I help photographers run profitable, sustainable businesses that they love. Each week on the podcast, I cover simple, actionable strategies and systems that photographers at every level of experience can use to earn more money in a more sustainable way. Running a photography business doesn't have to be that hard. You can do it, and I can show you how.
Casey Fatchett, welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. I am so excited for today's conversation. You and I have a lot of nerdy similarities, and I'm ready to geek out with you. How have you been?
I'm good, I mean, it's been a busy week for me. Things are looking good business-wise, and yeah, the weather has changed. Like spring has finally sprung here in the New York, New Jersey area where I'm at, and it's a lovely day, and I'm happy to be here and talking with you about photography and how we can help people.
I love that. I used to live in New York, and man, there is nothing like spring starting to show up after like the long cold. I was in the city, and it was like you'd get these wind tunnels down the
Oh yeah.
avenues, and it could be really brutal. And then like you'd have those warm days, and all of a sudden everybody's outside, and it's such a great feeling. So
I grew up in the Midwest in Michigan, and so cold is a different
it's
thing.
a different, yeah,
Midwest versus New York City. When I moved to New York City, I was like, okay, it's whatever this temperature is. I'm like, it's not that bad. And some places it isn't, but like you said, you get into those wind tunnels and the avenues, and all of a sudden it's like you want the layers because it's just like the wind is really brutal. But like yesterday, it was 74 degrees.
ugh,
And today it's like 67 right now. Like it's going to be like this all week, and I'm like,
perfect.
trying to fight away from the pollen, and we'll be good.
Yeah, well, I'm in North Carolina, and the pollen game here is strong. So yeah, absolutely. Well, before we dive in, I would love everyone who has not had a chance to sort of meet you to get a little bit of your backstory and just give us the quick 10,000 foot view.
Quick view. I became a photographer professionally 25 years ago, this year. And I started out doing headshots and band photos, like promotional photos, as well as live show photos, because I was an actor, and I knew other creatives, and
Yeah.
photography had been a hobby, and people were like, hey, we'll pay you for this. So I went out with my film cameras and back in the day, and that's how I, really solidified my technical photography, because the days before digital, you didn't have a lot of the things that we kind of like use as crutches now.
Sure.
And then I did my first wedding, and I really loved that. And I focused more on weddings. So I've been doing weddings for 23 years, 24 years. And yeah, I've done like almost 800 weddings. And
Wow.
Yeah, and I started a whole thing for photographers about 6 years. 6 years ago this month, I started the Nerdy Photographer.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. And yeah, and then that parlayed into a podcast as well. And I just want to make photographers laugh and help them learn about business.
Well, I mean, we say this a lot, but it is kind of a lonely industry in that you're usually working kind of alone. And I absolutely love the growth since I started of the sort of, I don't know, thanks to the internet, really, that there is this network of educators. There are certainly ways to network with other photographers, and I just feel like that access can really help individual business owners find their people out there. So that's great.
Yeah, it
And
can be
I'm,
very solitary.
yeah, it is. And I'm excited to have you on the show. But
I'm
I'm
excited.
really excited because this thing that you and I have in common is that we love to paint a more creative picture, I'm going to say, of how to think about your business. So, with that vague introduction, I'm going to have you dive in on this marketing topic that we're talking about today.
Okay, so I grew up collecting comic books, loved superheroes way before superheroes were cool in movies. I'm not gatekeeping more people loving comic books. I'm all for it. Just it's very ingrained in how I think.
Hmm.
It's one of the ways I think visually. Comic books, I always thought of like panels when I'm doing photography. So that was like part of how I saw the world. And what I like to teach people to market themselves as photographers or as, I mean, whatever you're doing. It doesn't have to just be photography, but I think it works visually for photographers, is to help you find your superpower. And when people say that, and first, before I get into this, caveat, write this stuff down, get out a piece of paper. And when you're thinking about these things that I'm going to talk about, write it down. You're going to want to write it down. You're going to want to change it over time, possibly. So it's good to have a record of this. Just don't leave it in your head. Don't leave things like in the ether, just where you're thinking about it, because if you don't put it down on paper or type it out or whatever, it just sort of like ruminates up there and you never really, it doesn't crystallize for
Hmm.
you, and it doesn't become like a solid thing. And, that's a problem because this is something you're going to want to work and rework over time and how it helps you. So we're going to start out with, what's your superpower? What's the thing that you do better than anybody else? And it doesn't necessarily have to be actually better than anybody else, but think about your market. You're going to have to think about where you are as a photographer, the people you're trying to reach. You have to have some knowledge of what's going on in your area. And what is the thing that you do better or do really well? Are you great at turnaround time? Is like getting people back amazing photos really fast your thing being able to pose people really, really well and like set up these Annie Leibovitz looking, Vogue cover shots? Is that what you do better than anyone, or like are you at the top of your game? The thing that, when I say that a lot of like newbie photographers, people who are just starting out in their business or are trying to still figure that out, what I
Hmm.
like to tell them is, what do you want to be known for?
Right.
What is the thing that you want people to come to you for? When I really sat down, and part of what benefited me after I had been a photographer for a while was feedback from my clients. And I always tell people, ask for feedback.
Yeah.
Ask for feedback from the people who don't hire you. Ask for feedback from the people who did hire you. My thing for people who didn't hire you is always send a quick email or whatever and say like, hey, thanks for letting me know you didn't hire me. You went another direction. Totally understand. Can you tell me what was the deciding factor in who you hired? Because that can teach you a lot about what's going on in those interactions. But when you're talking to your clients, it was something that I was unaware of, that I was just subconsciously doing really well, was making people feel comfortable. That, I mean, I know to an extent, I'm not like patting myself on the back or like say, that I'm good at making people laugh
Hmm.
and, those sorts of things. But the feedback that I kept getting from people was that they felt super relaxed on camera with me. because I personally don't like being on camera, even though I was an actor. It's like there's a character that you're portraying, and that makes things easier, I guess. But I think it's part of whatever my own get in my head, both thinking like, what is that photographer doing? What settings are they using? What lens? Oh, that lens? Really? They're going to shoot at that angle at that lens? So I get really nervous about it, and then I use that need to feel comfortable with my clients,
Yep.
and I wasn't even thinking about it, but now I focus on it because this is the thing that over more than 20 years, everybody who has something positive to say about my business says that without prompting from me, says this is what Casey does that made me feel really good about our interaction. There are other things too, and one of the things for me is turnaround time. Not posing people is one of the things that I do that people really like. But there, you kind of create your set of skills, your superpowers that are going to distinguish you from the crowd, because that's what photography is these days. I mean, the more the merrier. Bring people in, come into the industry. It's not easy. It's a crowded field.
Yeah. And
Uh,
I want to take 2 seconds to just like call something out that you said that I think is really like bears repeating. And that is that oftentimes the things that we're best at, we are almost unaware of because we're just doing us, like that you're just being yourself. So what you're talking about making people comfortable, I'm sure that's not limited to your photography business.
no,
That's who you are in the world. So when we're good at things naturally like that, those become things that seem second nature to us, right? It's, oh, yeah, everybody can write a great term paper or whatever, like whatever your strengths are, you oftentimes will discount them as strengths because we just naturally assume that that's what everybody does. So that asking for feedback and hearing those patterns start to emerge sometimes can bring our attention to something that we don't necessarily need to work on or anything else. What we need to do is just start calling it out and making it more explicit in our marketing and everything else.
it's one of those things. Yes, exactly. It's the thing. We always have a blind eye to it
Right.
because it is second nature. And when we talk about using your personality as marketing, as like because there's only one you. This is one of those things that people talk about, like, because I think some people think of it as, oh, I like to go hiking, so I'm going to get hiking people or whatever. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. That's part of it. That's kind of background. That's not why people are hiring you as a photographer.
Right.
You have to think about more about your interactions with people and what you provide for clients. And yeah, those things tend to, especially because we sort of just think of it as, like you said, second nature. We don't focus on it.
Yeah.
It takes something to kind of come out of those were the things, like looking at patterns on reviews or feedback from clients. Looked for me, it was the things like, yes, I'm doing this well already without thinking about it. Now I need to hone it.
Right.
It's the difference between like just naturally being good at having the skills to do something and like the natural raw ability, and now you focus on it, you get better at it, you make more of a push in that direction when it comes to your social media, your marketing, how you talk to potential clients. Like when I get into a meeting with a potential client and somebody says, what makes you different? Now I know what I'm going to talk about.
Right.
What makes you different as a photographer? And I will tell them, like, these are, and it depends on what type of client we're talking about.
Sure.
Weddings, different from portraits, different from corporate. There I will talk about those things that I know I am very good at, that are the things that set me apart, which leads me to the next part of it. Every superhero has a weakness. There's something,
Your
something
kryptonite.
yes, kryptonite, or like if you're the Green Lantern was one of my favorites, the color yellow,
He would
weird.
have suffered through that whole like early 2000s yellow
Ugh,
editing thing. It would have
yeah,
been bad.
yes, would not have been good. Like those sort of things that you're not good at is important to know those as well. Know what your weaknesses are. Know what you're like that, which are can be the things that you're not very good at.
Yeah.
If you're not good at posing people, don't focus on posing. Like don't, those are the things you avoid talking about in your marketing or your social media stuff. Like one of the lessons that I learned from another photographer friend of mine who also does a lot of marketing stuff, who told me, like, if you don't want to take these types of pictures, stop putting them in your portfolio. Like, don't, like, start slowly trimming down the number of photos that you show in blog posts or social media so that people aren't coming to you for that sort of thing. And I was just like, yeah, the things that I don't enjoy about my job, and I'm not necessarily like great at it. I would say, like, like I'm okay. And that's the thing, is like, I don't talk about it, but I doesn't mean I don't like try to bring myself up to a level
Sure.
of proficiency with it. Doesn't mean I just don't talk about it.
Right.
Posing, I can do it. I know how to pose people, but it's not something that I do.
Mm-hmm.
Some people need it though.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes I got to jump in there with, hey, this is how you guys should stand a little bit more. They need a little bit more direction so that I can do that when it comes time to do it.
Right.
But I'm not talking about it all the time. If that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
The
Absolutely. And I feel like there's two different ways that I see these sort of kryptonite issues. One side of it is stuff that you can say, like, for instance, I photograph families, and sometimes that includes newborns. And I'm extremely clear with people that I don't do post newborn photos like some people do. I feel like it's a pretty common one among that sector of photographers, where it's like you either do that all the time or you don't do it at all. I don't do it at all. I'm extremely clear with people about that. So I've just kind of written that out of the script entirely.
Yep.
However, there are elements to my job that are necessary for me to perform my job that are not my super strengths, and
Right.
in some cases are my weaknesses, but they are necessary. And so, like, and I'm just going to pull out an easy one that everybody can probably nod their heads along with, which is accounting. So that's not a front facing thing. I wouldn't really talk to my
Right.
clients or potential clients about it, but it's important. But I do have to do that. So in that case, it's like, this is the first thing I'm going to outsource.
Right. You need to know where you either need to outsource, delegate if you have multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you play to the strengths of, and your weaknesses are like, hey, I have an accountant.
Right.
I'm really good at math. I was a science major when I started in college. Doesn't mean that I know everything about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, I am happy to pay because I don't want the IRS knocking at my door. But yeah, find those things that you are not necessarily the strongest at, and either outsource them or bring yourself up to a level where you are competent with it. That's the things, like, you're just not going to, I don't know. I talk about, like, fast turnaround is one of those things. Like, I think some people, when they're starting out, fast turnaround for them, like, I got to get this stuff back to people as quickly as possible, and quality suffers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You need to find where your level is for delivering the quality that is imperative to you as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And like, speed, find out where that equilibrium is, and then you start that's when you start, like, telling people what the time frame for delivery is, and knowing your schedule, like what your workload is going to be with how many people coming in. And if you're outsourcing editing, fine,
Yeah.
know what that turnaround time is. But, like, don't overpromise and underdeliver.
Yeah.
You need to find those things that you're not necessarily going to highlight when you're talking to a potential client or using in your marketing. Again, a weakness is not necessarily something you're terrible at.
Right.
It's just something that you don't excel at, that you don't want to, like, point out in your marketing or highlight with your social media as something that then people are going to go, like, or kind of come to you and be like, oh, wait, hey,
Yeah.
like, oh, if you took, like, one great posed photo, don't make a big highlight of that on your website, because that's just something that you don't normally do.
Right.
Like, that's a pitfall, because then all of a sudden everybody will be like, I want that photo. I want something like that. And
This
that's
is one of my biggest complaints at various conferences and things like that, where they do live shoots,
Mm-hmm.
but they do, like, whoever the instructor is does all the setup, like, sets up the lights, sets up the pose, sets up the whole thing. And then they're like, okay, everybody come take this picture. And then all these people put that in their portfolio. And I'm like, they didn't even make that photo. They clicked a
Right.
button. It can be dangerous.
I see it on social media, like, where, like, there'll be just the same photo, like, popping up for most people, and you're like, oh, this is a shootout, or
Yeah, yeah.
like something that it was a setup. And yeah, they just also that sort of thing, especially that sort of thing, can hurt you as a photographer because then like when potential clients see the same picture showing up in multiple people's feeds, they're like, "What's going on here?
Is
Like,
this
what's
person
happening?"
a total scam artist? Like, did they even make
Right.
this photo? Yeah.
I had an instance where this is a whole other thing. A second photographer of mine started posting pictures, despite our agreement. Like, started posting pictures from weddings that we had photographed together, and people were like, "Wait, who shot this wedding?" And I was just like, "What do you mean?" And they go like, "Oh, this person posted photos from the same wedding," and had to go back to them and be like, "Hey, you know, in our agreement, like I either have that you don't get to post them because of whatever reasons with the
Hmm.
client, they don't want multiple people posting them, they're okay with just me doing it, or it says you have to state that you shot with me, that you were working for me, just to clear up any, like, I'm not
Sure.
saying you can't use it, but you have to include like my tag or on social media or whatever, just to clarify that with people. But yeah, I also like I really felt what you were saying because sometimes I'll do newborns sometimes for my clients, like when they have
Sure.
a child, whatever. But I also make it very clear I do not do those. Like I'm not swaddling and putting them in a basket and like
Right.
with props and things. That's just not how I am. I get interactions between people, like I get you holding the baby, those sorts of things. Because again, that is not my strong suit when it comes to any sort of photography. Like it is not like doing this super staged
Right.
thing. Like this is there needs to be more of a organic feel to it for me.
Yep.
Um, Not that I can't do it, but it's not my strong suit.
Well, and the lovely thing about almost all of these strengths and weaknesses is that you can market them because some segment of the population and your, population is going to that's going to resonate for them. That's going to attract them. When you try to be everything to everyone,
Mhm.
then people aren't really clear on what it is that you do or don't have in common with them. But like if your calling card is I make people really comfortable. I make chit chat with your mother in law at the thing and she's going to love me and all this sort of thing. That's great. That's going to be a huge relief to some people versus the photographer who's like, I'm a fly on the wall. You will never, you'll not even know that I'm there. That's going to attract a different person. But
Right.
they both have their value, but you can't really be both.
Yeah, I totally agree. These are things that I have a friend who is like one of the in our area, in our market, is like one of the best, like superposed art, like painter looking portraits at weddings. And he can only do two of them, like two setups at any wedding. But
Wow.
like this is what and he's a very good, like candid photographer as well. But he is known because he used to be a painter. That's what he was like formerly trained in art. Like he just knows how to see how things are going. Like and he does these elaborate reels on Instagram about his like light setup. You can see like what he does, and then you get to see the final picture, and it's like it looks like a painting,
Yeah.
and like that is what he does. But he is like that is what separates him. That is his superpower. And he's like very clear to people like it takes me 15 to 20 minutes to set up one of these pictures and
Yeah.
do it. So like this is what we're only going to get one, maybe two out of the whole wedding day. But these people are like that is like that connects
Right.
on a level with what the people he is trying to reach. But his like you don't see anything else on his Instagram feed because that he knows that is his superpower.
Right.
That's what he's leaned into. Even though he is good at candid photos as well, he knows that's the thing that really catapults him to the top
Sure.
of the people that he wants to reach. That being said, like I think that leads us to the next part of this is opportunities. Like superheroes are always looking for the what they can do to like help. Like, there's somehow they know like their chances to help people look for opportunities to use your superpowers in your market. Is there like to get people to think of you as that photographer, the person who does that thing in this area? Are there charities you can partner with? Is there a nonprofit? Is there something you can do, some sort of event that you can host? Like, or if there's something going on in, like, if you, like, where I live in New Jersey, there are all these little, like, pop-up community things. Is there something you can get involved in to more spread your name as the person who does that photo? You, like, who like, to show off your superpower. Where are the opportunities in the area to do that? I think that that is something that you need to be on the lookout for. You need to look for these chances to spread the word, because it's like, social media is not the end all be all of this. Like, you got to think about more local sort of stuff. Like, instead of throwing things out into the, into a huge net, you need to get fish a smaller area,
Yeah.
because that's how you're going to make stronger connections
Yeah.
with people.
And making sure the entire local police force knows to put up the bat signal the next time that, a bank is being robbed.
Yes.
And I'm joking, but like that is it's a legitimate thing when you're doing more in-person and community-based marketing. The more people who know who you are and kind of what your superpower is, especially if that has to do with, Anami Tonkin is always happy to come help out when we're doing charity fundraisers for the cancer center or whatever the case may be. Getting your name on the lips of lots of different people and having them know that you're kind of the person to go to for that particular thing. It really is. It's funny because everybody gravitates toward social media marketing because it's free and easy-ish. And I use easy very loosely there because I think it's really hard for a lot of us, but it is showing up in person. I feel like you get so much more mileage out of it.
Yes, there's an opportunity, like, face to face. Anytime you can get your face, your real person in front of people, as much as like lives and whatever, like, people get to see your personality. The more people see you in person, they're also, this is a psychological thing. People are less likely to want to, like, not mention you, or like, because they have a connection with you,
Right?
like an actual personal connection, as long as it's good. But yeah, like, there's, for example, if somebody in my local Facebook group says they're looking for an event or a wedding photographer, a lot of people pop up and mention my name because I have built this relationships with people so that, they know they will immediately mention me. I have a friend who's a dog trainer in our neighborhood, and anytime anybody asks doctor, like, there are 15 people who pop up and mention his name because they just know he has done such a job letting everybody know that, what he does.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, like, not, like, it's not, I don't know, I wouldn't say obnoxiously letting people know, but, like, when you meet him, he's a dog trainer. And I think that's one of a missed opportunity that a lot of people in the photography community don't want to say, I'm a photographer.
Right.
When you talk to people, like, oh, by the way, this is what I do. And, like, reminding people I exist out here, not saying, like, not just, like, sort of letting it go, don't mumble it, like, I'm a photographer. I think part of that maybe, especially when you're starting out and you haven't been at it as long, it's a self-conscious thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because people will be like, oh, what do you do? Would I have seen your work anywhere? It's the same as when I was an actor, and people be like, oh, have you been in anything I might have seen?
Right.
Yeah, it's that overcoming that, and especially when you're starting out, to, like, let people know this is what I do.
Yeah, I totally feel like I remember thinking, wouldn't it be nice when you decide to become a photographer that you get some sort of certificate the same way that, if you go to graduate school or medical school or something and they say, here, now you're a doctor. Because really the only thing standing between you and saying I'm a photographer lives in your brain. There is no, there are certifications out there, but they're certainly not necessary to identify as a photographer.
That's a whole other episode.
It is a whole other episode.
Graduate schools and, fine arts degrees and things like that, and school trained photographer. But I did do a lot of reading and practicing, and that was the main thing. Anybody out there, if you're listening to this, practice, get out there and shoot when it's not for a job. Learn your trade. Like, strengthen your skills. That is an opportunity for everyone to just
Yeah.
keep improving and learning. You've never learned everything there is to learn. There's always something new. But that also brings me to the final part of this, which is threats. Superheroes are always on the lookout for the what can threaten their whatever they're protecting, whether it's their city or people or whatever. You have to think about what can threaten your business. Recently, 2020, man, COVID, and there's not only so much you can be. It take a lot of foresight to be able to see that one coming.
Right.
But generally, there are things like being prepared for a change in the economy,
Hmm.
how people spend their money. I've done some posts and things about like recession proofing your business, what you can do to like, okay, where if I really need to make a cutback on my expenses, what are the things I can cut back first
Hmm.
to try to help myself out? But the one that really sticks with me as someone who's been doing this for more than 20 years, and because I've seen it happen several times, is changes in the way people buy
Hmm.
and how they research and find a photographer. When I started out, there were very few websites. People didn't have like personal websites at the beginning when I was doing this. And like it was really word of mouth. It was putting up flyers. It was putting in, postcards or whatever in local businesses or whatever to try to get people to know you were around and going and meeting them in person and
Yep.
showing them a printed book,
Yep.
like a printed portfolio of prints. That changed rapidly at the turn of the millennium into people having websites, but still people wanted to come and see because website quality was not great. People still
And
want
people didn't trust them as much at that point because they were new.
right because it's just like like the quality of the photos that you could upload when you didn't have broadband
Right.
connections and things were like it's not great, but you're getting an idea. And then you go and see the things in person. And honestly, anybody if I was in the market for a photographer, I'd want to see the things in person, see how it prints out, because anybody can make something look great on a website. But that changed when broadband became more of a thing,
Hmm.
and also generationally, as we
Hmm.
got to Gen Z, like becoming more prominent in being clients, and sort of younger millennials. Millennials had a different way of purchasing than I'm Gen X. So I was very familiar
Yep.
with how Gen Xers obviously make purchases and what was important to them and how they did this exchange. Like they wanted to trust you. That's trust. Gen Xers, we want to be able to know that you're not going to rip us off. Millennials have very strong BS meter.
Right.
Uh, we just be like, oh, that's not whatever. That's just made up. So they wanted to do a lot of their own research, and that has increased as we've gotten to like Gen Z. It is almost all research online
Yep.
and maybe a Zoom call. The percentage of people who want to meet in person beforehand has diminished and diminished and diminished.
Right.
And you have to be prepared for those sorts of things.
Right.
I'm not like I'm bringing that up as an evolution in how people buy,
Hmm.
so that people listening to this can know you have to be prepared and aware and see those trends changing. For me, I used to have a meeting space in Manhattan that I was paying a significant sum of money
Sure.
for,
Yeah.
and I noticed that no one had come in for a meeting for 6 months. They all wanted to do it online.
Right.
So when my lease came up, I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do this anymore. Nobody wants to come in. And that was 4 months before the pandemic.
Oh,
So I got
wow.
very, very lucky because if I had signed on for that, I would have just been like throwing money when I'm not making any, just like in the toilet. Here is what money I have. It is going, like
Yeah.
for a space that no one is coming into for, 8 months to a year
Right.
anyway because of the pandemic. And I was saved because I saw the changes that were going on, the trend. It wasn't that I knew that the pandemic was coming.
Hmm.
It was that I saw that people didn't want to come in for, meetings. But yeah,
Well,
like, go
and
ahead.
it's not just that you saw that, you were willing to modify your process accordingly. And that I think is the thing that is sneakier and harder is that we are all, in some way, shape, or form, kind of married to the way that we do things,
Yes.
especially if it has served us in the past. And the humility, I think, that's required to sort of see the changes and acknowledge that, like, okay, maybe my process isn't right now, isn't right anymore. And I think we've been in the industry long enough to have known a lot of photographers who were very successful pre-digital. And when digital came around and they, were like, this is a sub, I mean, that's again, a whole
Yeah.
different conversation. But there were people who evolved and grew. And even if they stuck with film, like they changed the way that they talked about their process. And then there were the people who kind of got left behind. And that, it's the tough reality of business is that you do have to kind of keep an eye on where you are. And if you're not moving with the trend, figure out how you can leverage that to your advantage.
Well, and that's one of the things that you can like. I mean, adapt or go extinct is like the sort of thing. Like, and I knew plenty of boomer photographers when I started out who just like were so entrenched in their ways and were the only ones who, like you said, the only ones who survived the switch from digital were the ones who were willing to change their mindset on like how they talk to clients, adapt to new technology, like stop complaining about like how the world is changing and figure out how you can fit into it. Maybe you talk about what you do differently
Yeah.
now to focus on like, hey, I do it differently than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
which, it's hysterical because like there was always the conversation when digital first became a thing and everybody go, oh, it's just letting in all of these amateurs into our
Right.
business and whatever. And it's like, well, then tell people you're not an amateur. Like
Right.
show them why you're not an amateur. Show them why
Right.
you're better than people who are like if you're just competing based on like price or whatever because you're afraid of all these like people who charge 10% of what you do, then
Right.
you're not marketing yourself right. Like
Right.
that's the problem. It's not that there are other people. You're not giving your potential clients the information that show what sets you apart.
Yeah.
And the other thing I find is hysterical is because I've always kept my film cameras, and I mean, only shoot like personal projects on them
Mm-hmm.
now. Like, and the amount of like things in my Instagram and TikTok or whatever of people who are like, "Ooh, like how to get that film look on the digital," and I'm like, mine has always been like, "Yeah, I got an idea. Just go out and get one of these, put some film in it." Otherwise, I mean, you're just doing a like I don't know, you're just slapping a filter on it,
Yeah.
and that's fine. But like like it's not a film look. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a nostalgia for something that wasn't experienced.
Right.
Again, look when you talk about like that is a for older generation. Like when you see those shifts, threat to you, what could be a threat of like changing dynamics generationally. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to do when alphas start getting married. I'm trying to navigate that as I have younger relatives and be like, okay, like, like let's talk about what it is you guys, how do you approach this? How would you approach this
Yeah.
if you were hiring somebody and you were spending this amount of money or whatever? Like, pick the brains of those people a little bit and like figure things out. But like I said, you can take a threat like that, things changing, and turn it into an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I talk about now as a strength is my experience.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot,
Sure.
when it comes to weddings, like, I've sewn people back into a dress. I've, stain sticked,
Mm-hmm.
stuff. I was like, but and there's no like, oh God, what are we going to do?
Right. Right.
Like, it's like, hey, don't worry. Got this covered. Been here, done
Yeah.
that. Don't worry about it. And that's a huge selling point.
Right.
And that's taking something that could be, threatening to my
Right.
job and turning, pivoting and saying like, here's one of my strengths.
Right.
My strength is I have gone through this, I, and put up the warning label. I am not saying anything bad about new photographers. There's a certain, expertise that is learned over many years of experience that makes it easier for me to do certain jobs.
Yeah.
Just because I've been there. I've done
Yeah.
it. Part of what people are paying me more money for is my ability to do it quickly and not having to take the time to figure out how to do it.
Right.
Like that I'm actually spending that time doing the job for them as opposed to researching, figuring out what to do. So that's an opportunity for me,
Yeah.
to set myself apart.
And I'll play, devil's advocate. When I talk to photographers who are newer in business and they say, well, I just don't think I can charge that much because I'm new, I always say to them, look, I've been in business now for a long time and I, charge what I charge. And part of what I sell myself on is I have a lot of experience. But if I'm being honest about my trajectory as a photographer, over time with experience comes kind of the rut and the I am not out there as much as I should be, pushing the creativity bounds and everything else that I was doing when I was brand new. Like I was willing to swim the ocean for a client at that point, and now I'm like, well,
you're comfortable.
yeah,
that's a weakness.
right.
Let's be
I'm
honest.
not going to highlight that in my marketing.
Right, exactly. You're comfy.
But I
And
would
that's,
encourage a new photographer to highlight that.
right. Encourage you, like new people, like you said, that hunger
Yeah.
at the beginning to try new things. That is a strength.
Yeah.
That to be able to because it's multifaceted in a way. You are trying to figure out what you like, what you were good at, what really meets your artistic vision of what the image you see in your head and making it happen in the camera or in post-production or whatever it is. You are willing to take those chances because I think some of it is, and maybe all of us could use a healthy dose of it as we're older and or more into our careers of, hey, let's figure something out. Let's the curiosity
Right.
of things. And I try to keep myself curious. It's part of the reason I still do personal projects on film is because I can't see
Yep.
the result
The
until I
instant
go and
feedback.
get the film.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's a thing in my head where I'm just going, okay, well, I'm just going to see the picture and then I can just adjust my settings, whatever. No, I have to get the settings right because I'm not going to know for a week whether or not if I take the film out right now and go get it developed,
Right.
whether it came out or not,
Right.
and whether I did it wrong. So there's that turning weakness into strength or opportunity is super important. And when you put all of these together, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, you have what's called a SWOT profile. This is this is something that any marketing professional is very familiar with. Having this information, should you at some point want to go to somebody who's a marketer to help your business, having this all written down and and even if you don't go to anybody else, being able to look at it and adjust over time is something that I always also give advice on is writing down your goals and checking in on them, having goals that you can check on in every month, every quarter, every year, whatever, to see how you're doing to meet those goals. This is the sort of thing that you should be checking in on too and going, okay, am I still there was a time when one of my strengths was I offered unlimited coverage on wedding days. I had a package that was just no time limits.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody else was doing that because I charged for it and they knew that they were paying a premium for this type of coverage because there was no time limit.
Right.
And as it averaged out, most of the time I was only doing 10 hours,
Right.
which is 8 to 12 is kind of my normal anyway. But I was mostly doing 10 hours and occasionally had absurdly long 15-hour day, but that was not the thing. But then more and more people started offering that package, so then it became less, it became less of a strength because there were so many other people who were doing the same thing.
Right.
So I had to find a way to pivot and make it a new, like find some other way to approach packaging for people that made me stand out in a different way. But that did me good for about 5 years.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Well, and I guess to kind
did
of
I lose you?
tie all of this up, one of the things that has been a thread throughout all four of these areas that you've been talking about is the way that you take that information and then feed it to your clients or potential clients in your marketing, because so many people are kind of self unaware when it comes to, they're shopping for a wedding photographer or a family photographer or any other kind of photographer. They're like, oh, I like these pictures. But there are so many other things that are important to them or may not be important to them. And by calling out and naming certain things, like I'm really easy to work with, I have, quick turnaround, I include no time limits. If you don't say that, even if it's true, even if you are good with people and even if you do have no time limits on your package, if that language isn't sort of put right in front of them, they may be aware of it, but they won't be it won't be a talking point for them when they're either talking to their partner or themselves about like weighing the pros and cons. So I'm all for really speaking those things out loud everywhere that you can. But I guess the first step is identifying them.
I think that if you want to have longevity in your career as a photographer, it's really important to keep an eye on and keep track of these things as they happen in your business. Because I can look back, I mean, I would say the first 5 to 7 years I was in the business, I didn't keep track of things enough. I didn't keep track of trending things to know enough about where my business was going. And that's why I was really up and down.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that if I wanted to continue doing this for a long stretch of time, I needed to have that overview of things. I needed to have the 10,000 foot view of where am I going and where have I been, and so that you can adjust with the times. That you adapt. You adapt your strengths over time. It's important though if you're starting out now and you're just getting started in this, or you're early on in your career, this will save you so much time in the future.
Yeah.
This will make your life 100 times easier. Learn from my mistakes. Work smarter, not harder. Doing this sort of stuff now and reevaluating it like every year, just to have a sense of where you're at, will help a lot.
Yeah.
In the long term, if you want to do this long term. If you don't want to do a long term, hey, whatever.
You can just fly by the seat of your pants.
That's entirely up to you. Hey, you're just doing this for a year or 5 years. Maybe you don't need it.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of those things that requires a fair amount of intentionality and discipline, because as your own boss, like nobody's going to tell you today is the corporate retreat day and we're going to evaluate all the testimonials we've gotten over the last quarter. You have to make time to do that for yourself. And it's going to feel kind of like you're pausing, taking your foot off the gas, oh, I should be editing or I should be out there, meeting people or whatever. But having this sort of, date, corporate retreat with your corporation of one
Yeah.
really does make all the difference. And you will, if you put it on your calendar and commit to it, it will pay dividends over time.
I highly recommend that. Put things in your calendar. Regularly schedule your check-ins with your goals. I do that every month. I do it every 3 months. I do hey, what is going on with my business? Check-in, so that we can look at those things and be like, hey, we're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's find the places where we could do better. Let's find the places that are failing, whatever. This advertising has not brought in anything for a year. Maybe we should reconsider our commitment to that.
Yeah.
Those types of things that will save you time and money in the long run. Hey, it shouldn't be that hard.
Right. This can't be that hard.
It can't be that hard.
Yeah.
We're trying to make your life easier here.
So good. Well, Casey, thank you so much for all of this. Tell everyone where they can find you and connect with you and tune into your podcast.
You can find the Nerdy Photographer podcast on all your major podcast platforms. Just search for Nerdy Photographer, and on pretty much any social media platform, it is at the nerdy photo, all one word. At
Love it.
the ad symbol, the nerdy photo. Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Reddit. That's where I'm at.
Oh, you're in all the places. I'm
I'm in a lot
jealous.
of places, and yeah, come find me. I do a lot of between episodes. There's a lot of humor. There are like little like learning things now and then, reviews of stuff that I like. Sometimes I do DIY projects because that's one of the nerdy things that I really get into, building stuff. And like, do I really need to spend $500 on that piece of equipment, or can I make it for $50? And I usually can make it for like $50 reasonably. I'm not going to use it a bunch of times, but like I needed it for a project
Yeah.
instead of going out and investing money. So that's something you're into. Definitely like tune in for that. But yeah, Nerdy Photographer Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Love it.
Anonymous, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed this.
It was my pleasure. This is a great conversation. I will happily chat with you anytime.
Awesome.
Have a great day.
You too.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of This Can't Be That Hard. I'll be back same time, same place next week. In the meantime, you can find more information about this episode, along with all the relevant links, notes, and downloads at thiscan'tbethathard.com/learn. If you like the podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Even better, share the love by leaving a review in iTunes. And as always, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic week.